Chapter 3. Timbavati. Bertie was born in South Africa in a remote farmhouse near a place called Timbavati. It was shortly after Bertie's first started to walk that his mother and father decided a fence must be put around their farmhouse to make a compound where Bertie could play in safety. It wouldn't keep the snakes out, nothing could do that, but at least Bertie would be safe from the leopards and the lions and the spotted hyenas. Enclosed within the compound were the lawns and gardens at the front of the house, and the stables and barns at the back. All the room a child would ever need or want, you might think. But not Bertie. The farm stretched as far as the eye could see in all directions, 20,000 acres of field. Bertie's father farmed cattle, but times were hard. The rains had failed too often, and many of the rivers and waterholes had all but dried up. With fewer wildebeest and impala to prey on, the lions and the leopards would sneak up on the cattle whenever they could. So Bertie's father was more often than not away from home with his men guarding the cattle. Every time he left, he said the same thing. "Don't you ever open that gate, Billy. You hear me? There's lions out there, leopards, elephants, hyenas. You stay put. You hear?" Bertie would stand at the fence and watch him ride out, and he would be left behind with his mother, who was also his teacher. There were no schools for hundreds of miles, and his mother, too, was always warning him to stay inside. "Look what happened in Peter and the Wolf," she would say. His mother was often sick with malaria, and even when she wasn't sick, she would be listless and sad. There were good days when she would play the piano for him and play hide and seek around the compound, or he'd sit on her lap on the sofa on the veranda and just talk and talk, all about her home in England, and how much she hated the wilderness and the loneliness of Africa, and about how Bertie was everything to her. But those were rare days. Every morning he'd climb into her bed and snuggle up to her, hoping that today she'd be well and happy. But so often she wasn't, and Bertie would be left on his own again, to his own devices. There was a waterhole downhill from the farmhouse, and some distance away. That waterhole, when the water was in it, became Bertie's whole world. He would spend hours in the dusty compound, his hands gripped to the fence, looking at the wonders of the field, at the giraffes, drinking, spread-legged at the waterhole, at the browsing impala, tails witching alert, at the warthog snorting and snuffling under the shade of the singay trees, at the baboons, the zebras, the wildebeest, and the elephants bathing in the mud. But the moment Bertie always longed for was when the pride of lions came padding out of the field. The impala were the first to spring away, then the zebras would panic and gallop off. Within seconds, the lions would have the waterhole to themselves, and they would crouch to drink. From the safe haven of the compound, Bertie looked and learned as he grew up. By now, he could climb the tree by the farmhouse and sit high up in its branches. He could see better from up there. He would wait for the lions for hours on end. He got to know the life on the waterhole so well that he could feel the lions where they were, even before he saw them. Bertie had no friends to play with, but he was always said he was never lonely as a child. At night he loved reading his books and losing himself in the stories, and by the day his heart was out on the field with the animals. That was where he yearned to be. Whenever his mother was well enough, he would beg her to take him outside the compound, but her answer was always the same. "I can't, Bertie. Your father has forbidden it," she'd say, and that was that. The men would come home with their stories of the field and the families of cheetahs sitting on the sentiles, of the leopards they spotted high in the tree, Lard watching over his kill, of the hyenas they'd driven off, of the herds of elephants which had stampeded the cattle, and Bertie would listen, wide-eyed, agog. Again and again he asked his father if he could go with him to help guard the cattle. His father just laughed, patted his head and said it was man's work. He did teach Bertie how to ride and how to shoot too, but always within the confines of the compound. Week in, week out, Bertie had to stay behind his fence. He made up his mind, though, that if no one would take him out into the field, then one day he would go by himself. but something always held him back. Perhaps it was one of those tales he'd been told of black mamba snakes who'd bite and kill you within 10 minutes, of hyenas whose jaws would crunch you to bits, and then the vultures would finish you off, anything that was left so that no one would ever find his bits. For the time being, he stayed behind the fence, but the more he grew up, the more his compound became a prison to him. One evening, Bertie must have been about 6 years old by now, and he was sitting high up on the branches of his tree, hoping against hope the lions might come down from their sunset drink, as they often did. He was thinking of giving up, for it would be dark to see much now, when he saw a solitary lioness coming down from the waterhole. Then he saw she was not alone. Behind her, on unsteady legs, came what looked like a lion cub, but it was white, glowing white in the gathering gloom of dusk. While the lioness drank, the cub played at catching her tail, and then she had her fill. The two of them slipped away in the long grass and were gone. Bertie ran inside, screaming with excitement. He had to tell someone, anyone. He found his father working at his desk. "Impossible," said his father. "You're seeing things that aren't there, or you're telling fibs. One of the two." "I saw, I promise," Bertie insisted. But his father would have none of it, and sent him to his room for arguing. His mother came to see him later. "Anyone can make a mistake, Bertie dear," she said. "It must have been sunset. It plays tricks with your eyes sometimes. There's no such thing as a white lion." The next evening Bertie watched again at the fence, but the white lion cub and the lioness did not come, nor did they the next evening, or the next. Bertie began to think he must have been dreaming it. A week or more passed, and there had been only a few zebras and wildebeest down at the waterhole. Bertie was already upstairs in bed when he heard his father riding into the compound, and then the stamp of his heavy boots on the veranda. "We got her! We got her!" he was saying. "Huge lioness! Massive she was! She's taken half a dozen of my best cattle in the last 2 weeks. Well, she won't be taking any more." Bertie's heart stopped. In that one terrible moment he knew which lioness his father was talking about. There could be no doubt about it. His white lion cub had been orphaned. "But what if," Bertie's mother was saying, "what if she had young ones to feed? Perhaps they were starving." So would we be better if we let her go on? We had to shoot her," his father retorted. Bertie lay there all night listening to the plaintive roaring echoes through the field, as if every lion in Africa was sounding a lament. He turned to face his pillow and could think of nothing but the orphaned white cub, and he promised himself there and then, if ever the cub came to the waterhole looking for his dead mother, then he would do what he'd never dared to do. He would open the gate and go out and bring him home. He would not let him die out there all alone. No lion cub came to his waterhole. But no lion cub came to his waterhole. All day, every day, he waited for him to come, but he never came. And that's the end of that chapter.